Hit record now before I forget, and we can get started. So just a couple quick housekeeping items. As questions pop up, please do enter them in the questions box, and we will address them all at the end of the presentation. We don't anticipate more than 25 minutes or so of presentation, so we can leave the majority of the time for Q&A. If you are having any issues with audio or video, you can drop those into the chat. Since we've gotten started, if folks just want to indicate now in the question box if they're having any issues with audio or video, do let us know. But if you are on your computer microphone and are having audio issues, sometimes it is easier just to call in using a phone rather than the voice over IP. And as I said, we will be recording and distributing the webinar afterwards. For those of you who do keep an eye out for events where Altmetric is involved in providing educational or informational opportunities, please do visit our website at altmetric.com/events. We will be all over the place in the next month or so. We'll be talking to more funders at the HRA annual meeting next week in Huntington Beach, California. John Templeton Foundation is one member of HRA. We might have other members on the line with us today. So if you're on the line, we will see you next week. For folks here who have interest in government-funded research, perhaps who work at government agencies, we'll be doing another webinar at the end of the month on using Wikipedia and the role that it's played in extending the reach of government research. We'll be speaking with folks from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health for that webinar. And then if you're in the pharma space, we'll be at the Special Libraries Association's Pharmaceutical and Health Technologies meeting, and in Toronto in Canada on the 25th, doing a presentation with other portfolio companies in digital science who are in the Toronto area. So if any of these events are of interest, just visit our website, information there on how to register and participate. And with that, let's kick off today's session. We are going to be introducing the John Templeton Foundation and Heidi Becker, one of the folks there who's heavily involved in looking at altmetric data with respect to finding efficiencies within the foundation. She'll provide an overview of what led them to look at this kind of data. I'll briefly introduce altmetric data just so folks who perhaps are not as familiar with it know what we're talking about when we mention the donuts or the altmetric score or the Explorer platform. Heidi will close us out with some use cases from the foundation, and then we'll leave time for Q&A then. So again, if you have any audio visual issues, let us know in the chat, and as questions come up, please do drop those into the questions box. With that, just again, brief intros. I'm Sarah, I'm Director of Business Development. My info is at the bottom of the screen, and then it's my pleasure to turn it over to Heidi Becker, from the Planning and Evaluation team at John Templeton Foundation. Heidi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Okay, great. Some background on me. I have been on both sides of this issue as both a grantee, doing reporting, and now at the foundation, kind of helping to figure out what we are getting from our grantees. So at the foundation, we often talk about big questions, and by those big questions we mean scientific questions, and for this presentation I'm going to choose a different big question. This is the big question we generally have for our grantees. So, what have you really done with our funds? And as most foundations do, we have a broad mission, and one of our founders' primary concerns was that the research that we funded would be disseminated and engaged with. So as planning and evaluation, as a department, we need to know both what the research showed and how far it went out. Was it discussed? Was it covered by the news, et cetera, et cetera? So with that in mind, we thought, okay, first thing, let's talk to our grantees. And that resulted in a mixed bag. This is a perfect example. So we were getting answers ranging from a very detailed list to something like this, and it was taking up an enormous amount of staff time to kind of verify and explore the coverage that they got, in more detail. And again, the reporting was very variable. So the next issue we had with the reporting was we didn't know if the reported coverage was of the project leader, the subject in general, or was it really about the research we funded? So without taking the time to dig into all of the reported coverage or engagement, this we don't know. So this was a need we had, and we did not have staff time or resources to fill it. So these are the numbers. I think it's pretty self-explanatory that finding out what engagement 2,300 publications had with academics and the public is pretty tall order for 3 people with other things to do. So this, Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this
Yeah, sorry.
or.
I was just realized I was talking to myself for a couple of seconds there. Before we dive into the definitions of some of this data, Heidi, do you just want to briefly kind of explain how sort of why then you started looking at new metrics?
Well, it was twofold. We toyed with increasing our reporting requirements, but we really did not want to burden our grantees with having to track all of this data. And frankly, we knew that they were missing data that we were interested in. And again, the cost benefit analysis that we did, once we started seeing Altmetric pop up at Scopus and on other platforms, I especially became really interested in it. And I think one of the primary reasons is not only does it provide this data automatically, but you're able to drill down into it further.
So it was really solving that problem of kind of example B of really getting into, well, they're telling me they got attention, but we don't actually have any way of verifying that. Is that right?
Exactly. We didn't have the time. And we also wanted to, when we make primarily research grants, there may not be an engagement component, so they may not be reporting on it at all. And this way it's the best of both worlds because we get it whether they report on it or not.
Okay, so not all of your grantees necessarily have to report on engagement.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Cool. So then Heidi started looking at altmetrics, and it's worth taking a minute to just quickly define what we're talking about, especially if we have folks on the webinar for whom this data is new. So basically, to define altmetrics as broadly as possible, and that this actually is a definition not coming from us, but rather from a standards organization in the US that's pretty much the arbiter of these sorts of definitions, the NISO group, which I've indicated at the bottom if you have interest in looking up their efforts around this space, and we've been involved in it as well. Basically, any digital indicator of engagement with scholarly research could be identified as an alternative metric. So the ones on the screen are actually behaviors that Altmetric, the company, altmetric.com, captures. But there is a big universe of engagement that goes beyond what you see on the screen here, including web analytics, searches, saves, downloads, usage statistics. The list sort of goes on and on. Comments on articles, bookmarking, sharing, liking, retweeting, all of those behaviors and many more could be called alternative metrics. The ones that you see on the screen here are specific to what Altmetric, the company, captures. So Altmetrics with a lowercase a and plural refers to this broad field or broad representation of behaviors, and then capital A and singular refers to the company. The differences between these metrics, in case you're coming from the journal space and that's what you're more familiar with, citations can take months or years to accrue. Sometimes they never do, depending on the research type. Impact factor is the same. Those tend to have a sort of 2-year delay in terms of the data they represent. And of course, these metrics tend to really represent just journal articles. So if you are working in a space that produces software or websites or other digital content that won't end up in a journal, the traditional metrics don't really serve you. And of course, citations and other journal-related metrics really speak to one specific stakeholder group, and that is folks who also read and cite in journals. So if you are engaging broadly with folks outside of that group, you're not going to be able to capture that in journal metrics. So again, these are meant to be complementary data sets. Alternative metrics can be helpful because they are immediate. When an article goes live on a journal site, or as a data set goes live in a data repository, the metrics for that engagement with that digital object can start immediately, which means that within a couple of hours, the altmetric score, the engagement represented in those colors in the donut, can change, over the course of hours or days rather than months or years. And as I mentioned, any online digital output that is discoverable on the web can generate alternative metrics. So if you are producing content that is not a journal article, you still have a means to gauge how it's engaged with. And then lastly, much of the research that's being funded now is engaging with a very broad stakeholder set, far beyond just other researchers who cite journals and write journal articles. So you might be engaging with clinicians, with doctors, with patients, with educators, with legislators, with people who write policy. There's a lot of different communities that will read this literature, but will never cite it in a journal article. And those are the communities that alternative metrics writ large can reveal to you to complement the journal metrics you're typically looking at. So what we're typically known for is our altmetric attention score. And if you look on this page here, this is actually an article, one of the highest scoring article within the funding area of theology and philosophy that John Templeton Foundation funds. So this is actually an article that GATF funds, and it's one of their highest scoring. Sometimes on journal publisher pages, you'll see that little brick there. And as you can see, this article hasn't had any citations as of when I pulled the screenshot about a week ago. And already the score is quite high. And if you hover over the brick, you see quite a bit of attention across a very broad variety of outlets that we track. So while there's no citations, there's a score. And the score needs a bit of contextualization. So I'm actually going to go live here and just show you the details page for this article in real time. So we're now looking at this live, which means that when you log in and look at this in an hour, the data could be different. But as of right now, the score for this article is 578, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But first, just to decode the colors on the screen, the colors are always a key, and they're always the same. So red is always news. The sort of lighter yellow is blogs. The darker yellow is Weibo. Aqua is always Twitter. So the more colors you see at a glance, the broader the reach across the 16 source types that we track. And obviously, the more monochromatic, the more narrow the reach. As you can see clearly here, the score is clearly not a sum, as the tweets alone already are 578. So if you add all of this up, it's much more than 578. And the reason for that is that the score is a weighted average. So rather than 1 point towards the score for each mention, some mentions are weighted heavier than others. And I'll explain that in another slide or two. So when you see this donut, or you see this brick on a publications page, when you click it, we'll take you through here to this details page that Wiley has paid for the rights to show their authors and their readers. So we give you Twitter demographics, Mendeley demographics. We contextualize the score for you because obviously 578 is generated by the algorithm we've created. So if you're unfamiliar with our data, that won't mean much to you, but we can at least contextualize what 578 means relative to everything in our database, other outputs from the archive repository, outputs of a similar age, and outputs of a similar age from within that repository. So that's a way of kind of understanding what 578 means. And then even more importantly than saying that the score is high, we actually show you every single mention that the item has received as broadly as policy documents, which you can see here. This item was actually cited by Australia Policy Online about a year and a half ago. all the way to every single tweet, every single post across all these platforms. And should we check in a week and someone has mentioned this item in a new source, that a new tab will pop up here, a new color will show up in the wheel, and the score will go up. So this is all live data updating in real time that we collect, as it accrues. So I mentioned that it's a weighted algorithm. We are looking at 3 things to generate the score. It's how often the score article or the research output is mentioned, where it's mentioned, so which of the 16 sources did the mention occur in, and who is mentioning it. And the weightings and all of this are available on our website. So the algorithm is publicly available. You can see how we weight the different sources that we track. It's all available on our site. And the thing to remember, if this data is new for you, is that the score has never been and will never be an indicator of quality. Rather, it is meant to tell you that there is a lot of activity happening around this item. It might be because the research is really groundbreaking. It might be because the research is really fraudulent. So high scoring articles can be high scoring because they are getting a lot of negative attention, or because they're getting a lot of positive attention. And it's also worth keeping in mind that the majority of articles written, data sets produced, content that we track, never receives any attention. So in an average article set across the humanities all the way to the biomedical space, articles in a 100 article sample, maybe 30% of them would have even one tweet. And then of those that have just one tweet, those that have a higher score than, say, 15 are an even smaller percentage. So attention is rare. It can be positive or negative, and it's more typical to not have any. So certainly not an indicator of quality. There are many articles with very high citation counts with no attention, and vice versa. So depending on the field, the correlation between citations and altmetric score changes. Just quickly about how we capture the data, we always make a rather provocative statement saying that we already have attention data for research that either you yourself have produced or funded. And often the question is, well, how can that be? And really only 3 things are required to populate our database with your research attention. We need an output that you've produced. That could be an article, it could be a data set, it could be a website you've produced for a funder. It could be really any digital product. It needs to exist. It needs to be tagged with some kind of persistent identifier. In the biomedical space, that could be a PubMed ID. Any online journals, they all produce digital object identifiers, or DOIs. In the economics, social sciences space, that might be a RepEc ID, an SSRN ID. So there's a broad array of IDs that we track. So as long as the research output has an ID and then is mentioned in one of the 16 sources or platforms we track, we will capture the data and populate our database with it, which is why we're able to say we've already got your stuff. So the second row here is meant to give you examples of what research output, persistent ID, and source or platforms look like. But let's just a little detail here. So we stress research output over articles because we track so much more than articles. So certainly peer-reviewed journal articles are the biggest volume of content that we track, but we increasingly are adding different kinds of research outputs into that mix. Everything from websites and blogs and white papers and even press releases all the way to data sets, clinical trial records, and books. So don't feel yourself limited to just articles. Those items have to be tagged with some kind of persistent IDs. Those IDs that we currently track are listed here. So a very broad range depending on the field that you work in. And the kinds of places that you might store data or research. And then lastly, the 16 platforms or source types that we track are listed here. And you could group them into these 4 categories of reporting, commentary, social media, and practitioner. They overlap widely, but this is sort of one way about thinking about the places where your research may be engaged with. So if you want to see altmetric data right now, You have a couple of options. If you go to our website at altmetric.com, we have a section at the top called products. And within that, you'll find Altmetric Bookmarklet, and you can just drag and drop that into your Chrome or Safari dashboard. And then if you are on an article site and you can't seem to find the Altmetric donut because sometimes it's buried, you can just click on the widget and it will drop down for you if you're not able to find the data there on the site, because sometimes it can be hard to spot. Alternatively, those metric sections on journal abstract pages will have the score as well. Most journals right now license our data. And then if you want to see data for many articles or research outputs at a time, the Explorer for Institutions tool is going to be the tool that you want to look at. And that's the tool Heidi and the Templeton Foundation are using right now to track the reach of the items that they're funding, to make sure that they're able to answer that big question of what is it that you're doing with the money that we're using to fund your research. So with that, I'll hand it back to Heidi. And Heidi, just give me a cue when you want me to advance the slides. And you might be on mute, Heidi.
Sorry about that.
No problem. There she is.
So as Sarah was mentioning, another issue that we had was kind of this aggregation of data, and that's where working with Altmetric to come up with a system that worked for us was critical. So the way our process works, and this is how we kind of, things aren't, anyway, I'm looking at typos. This is our process internally. So basically, once we have a report of publications from the grantees, we process those because, again, reporting is not always consistent and IDs aren't provided, and they're essential for the Altmetric database that we have now. So that's been incorporated into our processing, and it's working really well now. We process on a monthly basis, and we send our updated data to Altmetric quarterly. And then in an amazingly short amount of time, we can then explore, share, and analyze the research, the attention the research received over broad categories, like strategic funding priorities. So with that, this is a short list of the benefits that we've accrued by engaging with Altmetric. It saves grantee time, as we discussed before. They don't have to report all of this attention. That increases goodwill for us because it helps them answer other questions without as much effort and time. We don't want them to be doing that. More data is obtained than we normally get reported. So we will not get normally, for example, that a leading voice in the field on Twitter said this was a groundbreaking study. That kind of detail tends to get overlooked, but it is amazing to have for us. It frees up our staff time. It makes me personally happy because that's my time largely. And once you get into Altmetric for institutions, you'll have everything laid out in a way that eliminates the need to go back to, 10 or 15 grantee reports to look at data and aggregate it. And the fact that we have access to the full database Altmetric offers allows us to do additional exploration when we're looking for new researchers to fund, new lines of inquiry to fund that maybe aren't getting attention, we're not seeing attention. So that is wonderful, and it also allows us to see, kind of where we lie in the space, which is wonderful. We never had line of sight on that before. I'm going to just show you a couple of, so this is, Sarah's been gracious enough to make these wonderful slides. This is a screenshot of one of our departments, which at GATF is kind of a program area versus a department. And this is philosophy and theology. So these are all the reported publications by grants that were given via that department. and their scores. So this is great for the department at a glance, but I think you have further down, Sarah, more information. So it gives us not only a very quick view of what the articles were, where they were published, when, what the score was, but then we can also do kind of broader analytics on this information.
So yeah, I've
So this is
actually grabbed the results analysis. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you into a demo, Heidi, without giving you a heads up. So just to quickly explain what we're looking at here, the foundation has their own view. So I'm going to actually reset it so you're not looking at any particular part of the foundation. This is everything John Templeton has funded since we started tracking for them. The default results are by attention score, but if you wanted to look at, okay, items that we funded that were recently published, you could sort by date. And these are much more typical of what an average article score looks like, right? They tend to be low. They tend to only be from a couple of sources. But already you're seeing content that's reasonably new, that's starting to get some traction in the last 3 or 4 months with some increased activity than you'd expect. The items with, we call them the sad ghost donuts, the donuts that are question marks and gray. These are items Heidi's team has told us we need to track, but they currently don't have any attention. So as soon as they do have attention, those donuts will go from being transparent to having colors. But in the meantime, they pop up because they are a verified research output that the foundation has asked us to track. So regardless of how you sort the results, you can say, surface at the top, just content with policy documents. So this will reorder everything according to the item that has the most policy documents to the items that have none. Show us what's received mentions just yesterday in the past day. We'll limit that. So regardless of how you sort, you're still able to then analyze the results in a more detailed way across everything that we track. So this is all of the attention that Templeton Foundation has received over all time. So we'll limit it to the last year. And because Templeton Foundation really does a lot of research across some really interesting areas, they got a lot of attention across many platforms. So of the 16 that we track, they're getting attention in 15 of the 16 sources that we track. So if Heidi's group is particularly interested in just show me where we've gotten policy attention, we can just click on policy and see that. If the communications and marketing group wants to highlight work that's gotten a lot of digital attention, they might just look at blogs and news and get a sense there of if they're getting the traction in those outlets that they care about. Their social media team might just want to look at social media and see where they're getting attention. They can zoom in that way. So you have the ability to drill down looking at everything or looking at items one at a time. We pull out highlights for you to be able to just pull out the kind of top tier news outlets that you might receive. So again, it's the New York Times, the Guardian, the really high profile places where either you might get a funder report like that first example Heidi showed where they say, we have so many, we can't list them, to people who have no clue that they're getting reporting in the news. That'll pop up as well. The demographic data is going to be around Twitter, but we do anticipate putting more demographic maps up to represent blog and news reach as well. And if dissemination, broadly speaking, is what matters to you, the ability to say that one article has received this much coverage or a group of articles has received this much reach globally is very useful. And of course, we always give you every mention. So to Heidi's point earlier, an item can have a high score because someone is saying, this is going to be a seminal work in the field. Others might have a high score because people are saying, well, this is rubbish. And, this is a waste of whoever funded this made a huge mistake, right? That kind of context comes by reading every single mention. And so depending on which sources matter to you, you can say, again, I only want to see news and blog posts, perhaps from the last month. So I can update the time period and the mention type to just isolate items according to what I was interested in looking at here. And then lastly, not sure of Heidi, do you guys do a lot of analysis around the journals so much?
It depends on the department area or the field, to be honest.
Okay.
But
So
what we are finding is that journals that we had kind of pre-selected in our minds as important to us, we're now taking a broader look at these journals and saying, oh, well, actually, these journals tend to have a broader reach over time. Maybe they should be, more important to us than, or we should add them to the list at least.
that's really interesting because we're finding that across um, user type. So we're hearing that from funders, we're hearing that from authors, we're hearing that like from pharmaceutical companies, government agencies who would say, we thought the top 10 journals in our field were X, but now when we look at altmetric data, the journals with the most altmetric data may not always correlate with those that we just thought based on reputation are the
Cool.
quote unquote best journals. And so that's actually been leading to quite a bit of reevaluation, not to necessarily walk away from your original list, but to augment it
Right.
with new data. So this new tab, which we literally launched on Monday, is now available within the platform so that you can take the attention found in a broad article set and see how it's broken out across the various journals that are represented in the set, as well as the ability to rank them, right? So which journals get the most news coverage versus the most attention in peer review sites versus the most mentions on Wikipedia. And if you join us for our Wikipedia presentation at the end of the month, coverage in each of these source areas actually reflects very different kinds of communities and potential audiences for your research. So once you start to understand why people post in one place and not another, targeting journals that do very well in one area or another can become a really interesting project. So I'll just quickly wrap this up so I can let Heidi keep going here. But the reason we could jump into the theology section of the content they fund is because they've broken out their work by the folks who are writing the articles, but they've also broken it out by charter area, program area, program theme, and project ID and grant ID. So rather than Heidi or another program manager having to manually pull out, the 14 research outputs associated with grant number 12753, she can just click on that number and the items related to that grant pop up. Alternatively, she could go into our advanced search and type in that department number. I love looking at this theology and philosophy department because this highest scoring article around Wikipedia is something that I've been personally paying a lot of attention to. And again, all I have to do to find that is either type it into the verified department in the author or in the advanced search, or I can go here in the institutional view. And the last item that Heidi mentioned was this view gives us everything from Templeton and the ability to drill down to the individual author using Templeton research for funding. But if Heidi or her teams are interested in evaluating researchers who don't publish currently through Templeton funding or areas that Templeton has not funded in the past, but perhaps they should consider, they can jump out of the filter that just pulls out their data and look at the comprehensive database that we track. Because as I've already said, we are tracking everything that meets the 3 criteria that I stated on that earlier slide. So all of the major peer funders that JTF would consider peers or competitors are in there. All of the people who've ever applied for funding for JTF, their research is replicated in here. And so using our advanced search technology, you can actually pull out content and evaluate it with all of the same tools and functionality that I showed here that we used for your own research. You can now apply it to a general search of anything in our database. And again, that database is growing hourly. So when you do a general set, you're going to get lots of results that are not from John Templeton, but right here, number 2, highest scoring in this set is a John Templeton item, which is why it's got the little check mark there. So this is the platform that Heidi's teams are using for the use cases that she's going to illustrate next. And I'm actually going to go ahead and pop the slides up, Heidi, so you can get back on track here. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
There we go.
Okay, so I haven't included all of them, but one actually involves the booklet. that Bookmarklet,
The Bookmarklet,
whatever
yeah.
the correct term, the Bookmarklet, right? Um, but I'll go over that next. These are all of the things that we have brainstormed about while looking at Altmetric. These weren't necessarily things that we thought about ahead of time, but once we had access to the service and started really exploring, we found that there were multiple opportunities to use this data in different ways other than evaluation, in particular planning. So if we're looking at two proposals and on paper, both projects are equally interesting to us, it's the same amount of money, but we're not funding any engagement work with this researcher. So it's very helpful to be able to use Altmetric to see, okay, well, this person has a track record of disseminating the research fairly well. That might influence our decision one way or another because the funding dollars would be going that extra mile and we're not paying for it. That was one potential source of analysis we can do via Altmetric. And also when we see grantees who are struggling with engagement, that provides us with an opportunity to help them and provide them with additional resources, maybe additional funding. There are also, because we're able to analyze trends over time, we can focus our engagement campaigns coming out of the foundation on areas that we know either need help or we can build on momentum we're already seeing via Altmetric. And then, again, I always thought when I looked at this data that the Twitter data was the most or the least important. And I'm starting to realize it's really, once you drill down on it, it's fascinating because you have the ability to identify thought leaders on Twitter because Altmetric provides their follower count. It provides an overall reach for each article, which is fantastic. So even though, you might see a low scoring article with just tweets, it's worth looking at who's tweeting and why and what they're saying, because that also gives you a sense of the sentiment around the research. It also allows us to, as Sarah was kind of demonstrating, we can use the full database to search for research that we're interested in and to see how much of it is out in the world, in the space that people are talking about, and maybe we want to fund more of it so there's more discussion. And finally, this goes back to evaluation again, but we really want to know where this information and knowledge that is our mission to produce is going and what's it leading to, who's talking about it, in what contexts. There have been some pretty hilarious ones that we didn't anticipate. I should have brought that slide, but it's the second most popular article that we have, and it's about nurturing and testicular size. So that was pretty embarrassing to have to present to our trustees, but interesting nonetheless because it got a high score because in my perception, people were able to come up with very funny headlines for this. And so the stories proliferated. But that's what's so great about the transparency that Altmetric provides is you can read the articles, you can read the tweets, you can read the Facebook posts. You're not in the dark. It's not just a count. So this is the.
Hold on, I'm gonna see if I can find it.
Okay, yeah. It won't be hard.
It's this one, right? The testicular volume inversely correlated with nurturing and brain activity.
Yes. So just for a moment of levity, we'll look.
I'll take a look here.
Do you want to switch and look at the news?
Yeah. So, but again, like the news coverage here, like these are not insignificant outlets, right? Real Clear Science, Times,
No.
and what is it? What is it? Of course, they're going to take the findings and then make them into something that it's going to sort of become clickbaity. But
what was really interesting was we looked at this and we thought, why would we have funded the study. It didn't fit squarely within donor intent. So, we looked back at our data, and it was came out of an RFP that we funded.
Oh, okay.
So you never know. And those in our platform on Altmetric, we've been able to even identify publications by subgrant, and they roll up into the grant ID. So you can look at the products of an RFP together or
Okay.
separately if you want to, which is great. So this slide, this is something I do. We have an RSS feed that we get from Scopus that provides us with newly indexed articles that have a Templeton funder attribute. And they pop up all the time, and my staff do not want to get an email every single time a new publication comes out. So using the Bookmarklet, I'm able to really quickly determine whether or not this is something that is worth passing along to program staff. This is a good example of an email I would send, and I would just hyperlink from the little graphic to the details page in Altmetric, and then they can drill down and see what was actually said, and determine what they want to do with that information from there. I usually copy our communications department so that they can put news items on our website and push them out via social media. So it's a I can't say enough how much I enjoy having this at our fingertips and how much easier it's made life already.
I'm sorry, I was on the wrong slide when you were explaining that. So this is the email, and you just add the hyperlinks for whether or not researchers
Right,
should, whether your
right,
team should.
right.
And so for folks,
Yeah.
just a quick refresher, the Bookmarklet again is something you can grab from the Altmetric site and just drag and drop into a Chrome, Safari, or Firefox browser. So even though the journal website that you're on probably is already paid for the data, if you just quickly want to look and you can't find it, you can click on the Bookmarklet and the data will drop down. And that's what Heidi was sharing here in this email to her colleagues. Was that it, Heidi, for that section, or do you want to say, is that
It,
anything else?
did, no, I think that pretty much explained itself.
Okay. All right. Well, we have time for questions here. I see we've already got one. While folks are thinking of questions or want to drop any in, please do drop them into the questions tab. We'll answer them as they come up. In the meantime, I will jump back to the Heidi. First of all, do capture our contact information here if you'd like to reach out to us separately. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to show the platform so folks who might have questions about that can see it while we are answering questions. So the first question from Jane: do you have any evidence to show that funders using altmetrics actually get higher levels of engagement from their investments? Heidi, you can probably only speak to Templeton Foundation, but are you finding that you are able to get higher levels of engagement in light of the data you've been looking at?
Well, to be honest, we haven't done that kind of analysis yet. I think the next step for us is looking at where we are getting. I think I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. Are you asking if the altmetric data translates to what we would consider engagement, or are you asking if the data we have from altmetric enhances the engagement that our grantees are able to do?
Jane, if you could elaborate. She said the latter. She meant the latter.
Okay, right. Well, as we are starting we just relaunched our website. We're in the middle of a strategic planning cycle, and I am confident that we will be using altmetric data to help with that entire process, including planning, allocating engagement funds. We have had a prior president that insisted on bundling engagement money with research money in every grant. And we're in the process now of using Altmetric to determine whether that's really necessary in certain fields. We fund things from, quantum mechanics, very highly technical articles, which we don't really expect to get a lot of online attention. So those are the areas where we can focus our resources and hopefully produce more quality engagement and not spend extraneous funds on engagement when we don't need to.
So
I don't know
currently,
if that really answers your question.
so Jane, please do jump in if you have further follow up on that. But just from my understanding, Heidi, so right now, everybody who gets funding gets engagement funding as well, and that's something you guys want to be more like surgical about. Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, yes. And I don't think that, going to whether using altmetric results in higher levels of engagement. I think that's, it's kind of apples and oranges. It's a way to measure the engagement that's happening. Whether it gets better or not, we'll definitely need a baseline from altmetric
Sure.
to determine, which again is helpful. We didn't have how would we have created this kind of benchmark before? It would have been an enormous project for us. So in that sense, I think it will lead to better engagement and more quality engagement investments by the foundation.
So another question that's coming up is, you're obviously sharing this with internal program staff. Are you also sharing, do your grantees know that they're being evaluated on this kind of data?
They are certainly starting to pick it up because they're reporting Altmetric scores with their publications now, which is we don't require them to do it because we're going to do it anyway, but they are definitely aware of its rising importance to us. And we also use it, frankly, to communicate with grantees when they might not be aware. There are some academics, as almost everyone knows, that are so completely wrapped up in what they're doing and their many responsibilities as faculty, et cetera. They're not paying attention to maybe, Reddit or even all of the potential news outlets where this could have been discussed, peer review sites, I think that's really important, and blogs. We're developing an engagement resource for our grantees. So what Altmetric is going to be able to tell us is which blogs are writing about this kind of research, which blogs should you reach out to with your results, which news outlets, which reporters, all these kinds of resources we can provide to grantees now, so which we couldn't before. So I think over time we're going to see a lot more engagement with grantees and Altmetric data.
Fantastic. Jess has a question. Sarah, in theory, would you be able to use the Altmetric full database to source peer reviewers? And I'm assuming, Jess, you mean peer reviewers of grants or publications. Regardless of whichever you mean, the answer is sort of, and that actually gets to a nuance of the database that's worth explaining. The database, the fundamental building block of our database, is the research output. It could be a data set, an article, a piece of software. With the exception of customers who have told us that X article equals author name, we're not able for you to type in Heidi Becker and have any article authored by her pop up unless she's already a customer. And the reason for that is the building block of our database is the item, not the person, right? Because obviously disambiguating even Heidi Becker would be a very problematic thing to do. If you were to type in her name and we pulled up anything that was written by a Heidi Becker, we'd miss half the things where Heidi had a different last name, or it was H. Becker, or Becker was spelled wrong. So the disambiguating principle of the database is the persistent identifier. So for example, if you had a peer reviewer you were interested in, you would want to go and determine, all of her PubMed IDs or DOIs and drop them in our search and pull up their data that way. So for example, one way that I do this very frequently, if I want to look at research from a specific institution, if I want to see everything that we funded, that a researcher, that the University of Washington has produced in 2016, I replicate the search I've done in PubMed, do it in our platform, and then get a picture of all of the affiliation University of Washington from 2016 that's in our database, right? So this is not John Templeton funded content. There probably is John Templeton funded content in here somewhere, but we replicated a search in PubMed to pull up the data here. So rather than affiliation, the search you probably would want to do is last name or author name, and then replicate it here. So the answer is yes, but it's a bit of a workaround because the building block of the database is the item, not the author of the item. For Heidi, were you surprised by the amount of social media activity an article was getting when you first started using Altmetric?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially the more technical research. I think, well, we were surprised, frankly, at how many platforms you track. We were really excited to hear about the syllabi being added. That's extremely important to certain departments and certain of our strategic themes, if you want to call them that. And I think, again, we kind of tend to ignore Twitter and Facebook, and I almost think to our detriment because part of what we would like to do is encourage, a whole new generation of scholars to take on the questions that our founder was interested in. And that's the way people operate now. This is not, we're not operating in a closed campus kind of environment where, the breadth is limited and the reach is limited. We're looking to fund more in different areas of the world now. Online attention is going to mean a lot to us for those, especially because, as I like to say to my friends, we all come from different countries, we speak different languages, but a DOI is a DOI. And if the coverage is all in French, it's still going to be in Altmetric. That's what's great to me. Also looking at the news is you can see kind of at a glance which outlets are covering it and where they're from. So the international aspect of it is fantastic for social media, for tracking, where is this going, who's talking about it, and where should we make more investment or where should we pull investment from. Great. Something is getting a lot of attention on its own. Obviously we'd want to reevaluate whether we want to keep throwing money at things that are happening anyway. Right.
And you might find that work that is getting a ton of attention in a region that makes no sense based on what you know about it, and that might then, impact how you promote it,
Our new tagline is infinite discovery, and I think that totally applies to this database because there's so many things you could potentially do with it depending on what your priorities are. And I think as funders, we have to have a higher perspective on the work that we're doing as well as the individual grant level, and this enables us to do that. And in a very user-friendly interface. The graphics are great. I've put more snapshots in reports than I care to tell, but we couldn't do it better ourselves. So and the value is incredible.
Cool, good to know. And then Jess, to follow up on your question for peer reviewers for grants, in the platform right now, it would be Roundabout. The best tool that I can think of right now is the Dimensions tool from our sister company, Uber Research. And I can follow up if you have questions about that. What is the John Templeton practice around finding grant reviewers, Heidi?
We normally ask our program staff to, well, it depends. If it's a grant proposal that requires external review, we'll ask our grantee to suggest a couple of reviewers, and then the program staff will suggest reviewers. When we do it on the back end, the process is pretty similar, although we don't ask the grantee for obvious reasons.
Right.
Uh, so we will have our program staff kind of select who they feel are experts in the field. That yeah, that's pretty much people known to us who are very familiar with our mission because it's very um, it's not a black and white kind of
Right.
mission. So that's generally how we do it.
Cool. And then Jess followed up with, does the demographic information get broken down more than by country? And I'm assuming, Jess, you mean in a more granular level than just the country level. That's a question we get quite a bit, certainly with respect to the US. Just, can we even tell you states where content is getting attention as opposed to just countries? We are looking into that. Some of that is a function of the data that's being fed to us. So, for example, in Twitter, we get the data that we're able to show you here on this Twitter map because it's self-reported by Twitter users. So if a Twitter user chooses to say, I'm in Massachusetts, USA, that might be something we can lift. But if the Twitter user doesn't indicate any location, which, as you can see, the largest percentage on most of these graphs will be folks who don't indicate any location, then we don't have that data. And that's a similar issue with Mendeley and a number of other places that give us demographic information. We are looking to beef up this tab with both news and blog maps. And I think the challenge there would be similar if we could drill down beyond just the country the news outlet is from. That could probably, we'd have to determine if the places that feed us data basically have that meta tag in their data. But for now, the short answer is countries only. But TBD, we are evaluating on that. And then the last question Jess had was, would you be able to search your full database for a cancer type and then see the leading people in the area to be approached as potential peer reviewers? And so again, the short answer to that is yes, you can do that. But you would have to, so for example, let's look at the full database. And let's search. This is going to get obviously a ton of answers, but let's search for oncology. Well, oncology is too broad. Breast cancer. It's probably still way too broad. So the results that come up are going to be articles, right? They're not going to be, you can't take this result set and then group it by people. And that's why a tool like Dimensions or some of the other tools out there would be better, because for this, you'd actually have to click through, see the article, see who's on the article itself, and then determine from there if they're currently a reviewer or not. So the metadata is there. We'll always be able to go to the publisher site from our site and see who the folks are. Where I think we could bring value to is at least tell you, these are the highest ranking items in terms of attention in this particular therapeutic area. And then, you could decide, all right, well, based on that, we're not interested in anybody who's gotten attention in, these top 10 journals. We want reviewers from the next 10. Those are sort of ways to get around it. But in terms of getting a nicely curated list of names, that's not going to be something our platform can support you with. But we'll follow up with you offline with some other options that might be a little bit more useful for what you need.
And I would say I'll also add, Sarah, that we're using Dimensions now as well.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think they're very complementary. So I would highly recommend looking into that.
Yeah, there's for folks who are less familiar with Dimensions, because we're sister companies within digital science. You can in the publications function of Dimensions see our donuts. The interaction between our tool and the Dimensions tool is they complement each other pretty nicely. So we can follow up with you, Jess, on a bit more information there if you have any. In the meantime, though, we are at the hour. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Heidi, so much for taking the time to share this with us. I learned a lot in the last hour. And thanks so much to everyone who attended on the line. We will be sending this recording around. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. And we'll see you on the next webinar, or hopefully in person. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.